go, the more you actually begin to understand really what a technology is and how it's going to impact the world, because then you start to see it fail for people that it's not designed for. And I think part of the challenge of Silicon Valley is in fact that they exist in a bubble and they don't actually interact with most of the rest of the world, and they therefore can perpetuate these narratives for a long time about the fact that what they're doing is ultimately beneficial for everyone, when the reality is that it's really just beneficial for a small group, and it can be devastating for the majority of people in other contexts. In my book, I talk about two particular impacts that are born most heavily in the global majority. One is the labor exploitation that is involved in the production of these technologies. OpenAI contracts many workers all around the world, and especially in impoverished communities, to do things like data annotation, preparation, cleaning, and content moderation for their GPT models. And I talk in particular in the book about the case of OpenAI hiring workers from Kenya to perform the content moderation that ultimately enabled the popularity of ChatGPT and turned OpenAI into a household name overnight, but left the Kenyan workers completely and utterly broken as individuals. Their families fell apart, their communities fell apart, and they ended up taking many years to recover from that kind of trauma of engaging in toxic content day in and day out. The other impact that I talk about is the environmental impacts and the public health impacts of hosting the massive computing infrastructure that the industry insists that they need to develop their models. This is not actually technically true. You do not actually need this vast amount of computing infrastructure to advance AI capabilities, but Silicon Valley tells this narrative in part because these companies are racing with one another, and it is faster to just scale a facility than do actual innovation to develop new techniques and new methods for advancing AI capabilities. And also, it is a way for them to justify accumulating an extraordinary amount of land, energy, minerals, freshwater resources, and other critical infrastructures within their hands. And so they end up building these computing infrastructures in the US, but also in global majority contexts, especially in Brazil. There's tons of data centers now coming to Brazil. Where do they mine the minerals for producing computer chips that then they put into these data centers in places like Chile, in places like the Congo? And those are the communities that then bear the enormous costs of this supposed AI revolution that is going to bring us to the future. And instead, in many instances, for the global majority context, it ends up pushing these communities back into the past.